holding, I hear you ask? Well, it's a solid brass pestle and mortar, made from melted down cannons in the 19th century. How do I know all these things, and why am I holding it? Because it's a family heirloom. It's been in the family for generations, and I am the current custodian of it. It's also very heavy, so I'm going to put it down. The point is this. I own that, and there can be no debate about that. And many people have bits of history sitting round in their houses. But it's a lot more different for museums. And I'm not just talking about people handing stuff in that may not be theirs. I'm talking about a national issue about the ownership of historical artifacts. Because there's a trend that's only growing at the moment, where countries which have had artifacts taken from them for multiple different reasons are saying, we'd like them back, please. But it's a lot more complicated than that. If you're a major museum, you have artifacts that are from beyond your borders. And it doesn't matter which major museum or indeed art gallery we're talking about. They all have the same issue. Now, some of them have been bought and rubber stamped, and it's obvious that they are definitely property of the museum. But there's a murky 19th century background to many things. If there's a poster boy to this problem, then it's got to be the Elgin or Parthenon marbles in the British Museum. By the 19th century, the Parthenon was in quite a state, and Lord Elgin recognised this, and consequently bought the frescoes round it and shipped them back to the British Museum, saving them for posterity. However, shortly after this, Greece got its independence from the Ottoman Empire, and a century after that they even built a museum to house these frescoes and want them back. But they were bought fair and square. The fact that the country changed territories decades later wasn't anybody's fault. It gets even more complicated with the so-called horses of St. Mark's. These were taken from Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade by the Venetians in 1204, but they've been in Venice ever since, well, up until Napoleon stole them in the 19th century. But when Napoleon fell in 1815, they were returned to Venice, not Constantinople. So who owns them exactly? Preservation and study tends to be the main argument as to why they should stay in museums, and there can be no better example than, once again, the British Museum with the Rosetta Stone. Had the French not invaded Egypt and found it, and had the British not stolen it from the French, then basically the hieroglyphics would never have been decoded. As the British Museum did all the hard work and contributed so much, surely it should stay as a thank you. Or maybe not. Then there's the far more sensitive issue of human remains. Now, some of them have been given as bodies to science, but in other situations, ethnic groups have had their bodies taken away, and that's really important to them culturally. But it's not always cut and dried. As you can see here, sometimes human remains are turned into things of beauty. Do you return them, or do you keep them as a sign of cultural difference? The Smithsonian Institute is currently getting rid of thousands of bodies because of this. The argument with Elgin is one essentially of preservation. However, this argument continues to this day. The Arab Spring, the violence in Syria, and beyond, indeed the Iraq War, has led to many priceless relics being destroyed. Are they not safer in a Western museum where it's unlikely for a war to happen? Look, short of killing people, this is about as emotive a subject as it gets. If your country has a key piece of its heritage in another country's museum, I can understand why you're going to be angry. The British Museum argues that this is an opportunity to see many of the world's cultures under one roof, and is that not a small price to pay for having a few bits and bobs moved round the world? And indeed anything that was taken illegally or usually seen as a sign of war booty has largely been returned. But do you get these really emotional areas like the Elgin marbles or indeed these dead ancestors from certain cultures? What are we to do with them? And why? And how? How can we keep everybody happy? Is a deal that was done not a deal? Do we have to renege on business deals made in good faith 200 years ago because of political correctness or national interests today? It's a really thorny and therefore really interesting concept and conversation to have. So, what do you think?
Well, hopefully that should start a bit of a debate. However, in the meantime, as always, At History Gems exists on Twitter and on Facebook, or indeed you may be watching this particular video on YouTube. But there's always new and up-to-date history topics to talk about. And of course, there's the Busy Person's Guide to British History, the book, available on Amazon. Thank you for watching.